Welcome to this worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. My name is Cindy Miller, and I'm your worship associate for today. Whether you are a long-time member or if this is your first visit here, we welcome you as you are. Unitarian Universalism is a liberal religion with Jewish Christian roots. It has no creed, but rather it affirms the worth of human beings, advocates freedom of belief, and the search for truth and meaning. We welcome you to this virtual and holy space. Please know that you are welcome here. This service is led from the church's sanctuary today by Reverend Kevin Carson. Vic and Drew are taking care of the technology needs for you to stream this service. Jessica is to be thanked for our beautiful music, and Elizabeth Cogliati for our time for all ages. We have several announcements today. As you are able, please sign into the chat box, likely on the right side of your screen, or if you're using a smartphone, it might be below the window. This will let us know who is joining us. If you have joys, concerns, or sorrows that have affected your lives in the recent past, and that you would like to share with the congregation, please post them to the chat box on the right of your screen or below your screen. If you are joining us for our live Sunday service for the first or second time and would like to get on our email newsletter list, please call the church administrative office and leave a message with your email address. If you would like to talk to someone about the church, please contact the office. We are so glad you're joining us. Molly Brinkerhoff is getting free "We Are Everywhere" yard signs from the Wasmuth Center for Human Rights in Boise. It is the home of the Anne Frank Memorial. It is designed to counter the neo-Nazis who have vandalized the Anne Frank Memorial. If anyone else is interested in getting one, please email Molly at brinkerhoff.net. Further information can be found in your weekly update email from this past Wednesday. The care team reminds you that they are there for you. If you need a ride to a doctor's appointment, or you or your family is suffering from the flu or some other malady and would appreciate a meal you don't have to prepare, would you appreciate a social, friendly call so that you don't feel so alone? The UUCIF care team is here to help you. If you need a hand or know a member or friend who does, please contact the care team. The contact information is in the UUCIF weekly update that was emailed on Wednesday. The Women's Social Group will meet over Zoom on Friday, February 5th at 5:30 p.m. A link will be sent out over email. If you do not receive it, please email Elizabeth Cogliati at dree@idahofallsuu.org. And our last announcement, of course, in the time of COVID and of virtual meetings, we remind you that the church is entirely supported by us, the members and friends. You can make your contribution by mailing a check to the church or by clicking on the donate button in the upper right corner of the church's website. So as the formal start of our service today, we will ring our peace bowl. So please help me ring in today's service by becoming present to this space and this time, no matter where you are. I will ring our peace bowl 3 times, and as I do so, please breathe deeply. As Victoria reminded us last week, breathe in peace and breathe out love. For as long as you can hear it sound, I invite you to breathe slowly in peace and slowly breathe out love. The peace you will feel will bring you into our shared sacred gathering, no matter where you are. We will begin our service with our prelude, the oneness Our church covenant was decided upon by our members, and it, along with the 7 Unitarian Universalist principles, is our guide to how we relate to our world and to each other. Even though we cannot be together physically and cannot recite this as one, feel free to read along with me from your order of service as I read the covenant here. Love is the spirit of the community and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And as Reverend Kevin lights the chalice, we can contemplate this quote about a small bird, the water ouzel. The water ouzel in his rocky home and foaming waters. How romantic and beautiful is the life of this little brave singer on the wild mountain streams. building his round, bossy nest of moss by the side of a rapid or a waterfall, where it is sprinkled and kept fresh and green by the spray. No wonder he sings well, since all the air about him is music. Every breath he draws is part of a song, and he gets his first music lessons before he is born, for the eggs vibrate in time with the tones of the waterfalls. Birds and stream are inseparable, songful and wild, gentle and strong, the bird ever in danger in the midst of the stream's mad whirlpools, yet seemingly immortal. And so I might go on writing words, but to what purpose? Go see him and love him, and through him, as a window, look into nature's warm heart.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is the poem Wild Geese by Mary Oliver. You do not have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair, yours, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. Meanwhile, the sun and the clear pebbles of the rain are moving across the landscapes, over the prairies and the deep trees, the mountains and the rivers. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clean blue air, are heading home again. Whoever you are, no matter how lonely, the world offers itself to your imagination, calls to you like the wild geese, harsh and exciting, over and over announcing your place in the family of things. I invite you to join in our opening hymn, number 175. We celebrate the web of life.
We celebrate the web of life, its magnitude we sing, for we can see divinity in every living thing. A fragment of the perfect whole in cactus and in quail, as much in tiny barnacle as in the great blue whale. Of ancient dreams we are the sum, our bones link stone to star, and bind our future worlds to come with worlds that were and are. Respect the water, land, and air, which gave all creatures birth. Protect the lives of all that share the glory of the earth.
Today's Time for All Ages is The Lumberjack's Beard by Duncan Beatty. Big Jim Hickory was a lumberjack. He lived by the forest in a little log cabin. He had burly shoulders and a big, bristly beard. Every morning he did limbering up exercises. It's very important to limber up if you're a lumberjack. After a hearty breakfast of pancakes and maple syrup, Jim slung his trusty axe over his burly shoulder and headed out into the forest. Chop, choppity chop went Jim's axe. Timber! Echoing through the valley as he felled tree after tree after tree. After a long day of sawing, whacking, cleaving, and hacking, Jim headed back to his cabin. That evening, when he was just about to go to bed, he heard a peck, peckety peck at the door. Jim looked down to see a very small and very angry bird. "I had just built a new nest in my tree," shrieked the bird, "and you chopped it down." Jim scratched his chin. Then he had an idea. "I suppose you could move into my beard," he said. "Very well, then," said the bird, and in it flew. The next morning, Jim woke up earlier than usual due to the birds chirping at the crack of dawn. He did his limbering up exercises, got dressed, and ate his breakfast, with a little help from the new tenant in his beard. His next job was to strip all the leaves and branches from the tree trunks and burn them in a big bonfire. After a long day of chopping, snapping, burning, and crackling, Jim trudged back to his cabin for a well-earned rest. No sooner had he put his axe away than he heard a noise at the door. Scratch, scratchity, scratch. He looked down to see a very angry porcupine. "I needed those leaves and pine needles to make a cozy shelter, but you burned them. Where am I going to live now?" snarled the porcupine. Jim thought and scratched his chin. "Well," he said, "I suppose you could move into my beard." He bent down, and the porcupine crawled in. The next morning, Jim woke up even earlier and attempted to do his limbering up exercises. He looked in the mirror and scratched his chin. Yow! He got porcupine quills in his fingers. He tried to eat his breakfast, but he lost his appetite when he noticed bird poop on his shirt. Jim's job that day was to float all the tree trunks down the river to the lumber yard. One by one, he rolled the logs into the fast-flowing water. After a hard day of lugging, splashing, rolling, and crashing, Jim staggered back to his cabin. Thump, thumpity, thwump went his door. He looked down to see a very angry beaver on his doorstep. "I spent all day building my dam, and it got smashed to bits by all those logs you threw in the river," it snarled. Without a word, Jim picked up the beaver and put it in his beard. Between the birds chirping, the porcupines prickling, and the beavers thwumping, Jimmy didn't get much sleep that night. He was too tired to do his limbering up exercises in the morning, and the beaver's thwumping tail knocked his pancakes all over the floor. Oh, no. "That's it," cried Jim. "I can't take it anymore. You all have to move out today." "But where will we live?" cried the animals. As Jim scratched his chin, he had a brilliant idea. He went into his bathroom, took out a razor, and began to shave off his big, bristly beard. Then he took the hair and piled it up on his porch, and the bird, the porcupine, and the beaver all moved into their big, bristly new den. That night, Jim slept better than he had for some time. He woke up and did some particularly vigorous limbering up exercises and put on a fresh plaid shirt. Then he made an enormous tower of pancakes and maple syrup. Jim looked out the window at the bare ground where the forest used to be and scratched his now stubbly chin. Then he had another brilliant idea. Jim took his shovel and dug hole after hole after hole, and planted tree after tree after tree. Jim's beard grew back over time. The trees took quite a bit longer, but it was worth the wait. The end.
For years, the sharing of joys, concerns, and sorrows has been our enduring ritual. There's a time in our congregation where each of us has an opportunity to share major life events so that we can all be uplifted by the Unitarian Universalist community. As Drew reads the joys, sorrows, or concerns that were mailed to us or put in the chat box, Reverend Kevin will light a candle.
So we have one joy. It's from Amanda and Drew and Winston. Yesterday was Rob Logan's birthday. Amanda's father, my father-in-law, and Winston's grandfather. And we were very happy to celebrate, even though we actually couldn't go inside the house and be with them due to COVID. And we hope that he enjoys all the beer we brought him.
We light an additional candle for all those joys, concerns, and sorrows we hold in our hearts and are unable to share today. Stay healthy and strong, members and friends. Our UU community lifts up its love for each and every one of you.
Our reading this morning is an excerpt from the book Our Life as Gaia by Joanna Macy. Come back with me to a story we all share, a story whose rhythm beats in us still. There is science now to construct the story of the journey we have made on this earth, the story that connects us with all beings. There is also great yearning and great need to own that story, to break out of our isolation as persons and as a species and recover through that story our larger identity. Right now on our planet, we need to remember that story, to harvest and taste it, for we are in a hard time, a fearful time. And it is the knowledge of the bigger story that is going to carry us through. It can give us the courage. It can give us the strength. It can give us the hilarity to dance our people into a world of sanity. Let us remember it together. We don't know exactly when our first human ancestor experienced feelings of awe and wonder that could be described as spiritual or religious. But archaeological evidence suggests that it happened at least 100,000 years ago, and possibly even a few million years ago, long before our genus Homo was even around. It is easy to imagine that those first spiritual feelings were inspired by the natural world that has always surrounded us, the earth, from which we evolved like all other forms of life. Perhaps it was the star-filled night sky that stirred the soul of our ancient ancestor. Or maybe it was witnessing some incredible demonstration of nature's power, perhaps a thunderstorm or earthquake. Or maybe it was simply the recognition of the mortality that all living creatures share, feeling grief at the death of a newborn or a member of the family group. But no matter when those first spiritual feelings emerged, they have been an inextricable part of what it means to be human ever since. For countless millennia, animism was the religion of the day, with important animals, plants, and even places venerated as spirits or deities, often imbued with powers that could influence the well-being of an individual or even a whole tribe. Survival depended on success in hunting and gathering, so rituals emerged that acknowledged our interdependence with other forms of life and sought to placate the spirits of our fellow creatures as we robbed them of life for our sustenance. Even in contemporary times, among exceedingly small pockets of isolated people, this relationship with the natural world continues. But for the majority of the billions of people alive today, we have lost the intimacy with nature that our ancestors once enjoyed. As our thinking became more abstract and philosophical, so did our gods. Yahweh, for example, evolved from a Canaanite sky god to become the principal deity of the ancient kingdoms of Israel and Judah, and later to be imagined as the one God who created and governed the entire cosmos. And though many of the great religious traditions retained a degree of polytheism with a pantheon of gods and lesser spirits, both monotheistic and polytheistic religions began what we might call a journey toward interiorization, a slow, steady shift in our sense of identity from one grounded in our relationship with the natural world to an internally focused, individualistic sense of self or soul. In Western thinking especially, the world became categorized into a dichotomy of material and spirit, with the material world increasingly falling out of favor as having intrinsic sacred quality. By the time Galileo and Descartes came along, the nascent scientific understanding of the world began to greatly enhance our knowledge of the earth and the cosmos, but the price we paid was further alienation of the human psyche from nature. Everything apart from the human soul or consciousness was reduced to things that could be used and manipulated, and even animals could be considered soulless automata incapable of experiencing emotions and feelings akin to ours. But in more recent decades, science has begun to reveal the fallacy and arrogance of such thinking. We are beginning to understand that this radical split from nature has produced profound consequences for humanity and for the rest of the Earth's biosphere. And from the emerging field of ecopsychology, it is becoming apparent that our disconnect from nature could even be detrimental to our mental and physical well-being. Deep down in our soul, it seems, we long to restore our spiritual connection to the earth and our fellow creatures, to reunite our human consciousness with nature at a fundamental level. Intuitively, we long to be whole by extending our sense of self beyond our single being, to become attuned to the interdependent web of all existence as an ecological self of relationships. Among religious thinkers in the West, there have always been a handful of notable people who spoke about our spiritual connection to nature in some form. But beginning in the late 1700s, with the emergence of Romanticism in Europe and the subsequent Transcendentalist movement in America, a return to reimagining nature through a spiritual lens began to gain real momentum. For those who could move beyond traditional beliefs, once Darwin described the evolution of species a few decades later, humanity was restored to our rightful place among our animal brethren. And this fall from our once lofty status opened the door to new spiritual possibilities. For some, a lack of special status implied that humanity should be the sole focus of our ultimate concern, and this did little to change our ethical treatment of the rest of creation. Humanists, freed from theistic bonds, imagined a better world engendered by science and technology, and we must admit that much of this has come true. As someone waiting to receive the COVID vaccine, I am grateful that the science exists to combat such diseases. And as I typed this sentence on my computer, I paused to think about the technology that enabled me to do so. But despite our many scientific advances, a growing number of spiritual seekers began to feel a need for something more. Not only was scientific humanism insufficient, the growing awareness of our destructive impact on the natural world and the undeniable role that science often played in facilitating it suggested that we needed to rethink our position. When we started to listen to that still small voice within, that longing to reconnect with nature in a spiritual relationship grew louder and louder. In the 1960s and 70s, it was screaming at us across cultural and religious boundaries around the world. It wasn't just a call to action by a growing environmental movement, though that was certainly an important component. Poets, philosophers, psychologists, and religious leaders of all stripes admonished us to find our way home to a spiritual relationship with the earth, not only for the good of the planet, but for the sacred joy, healing, and understanding that the relationship offers. At that critical juncture, the world's religions had a choice to make: to either ignore the growing chorus of voices calling for a restoration of the earth-human relationship, simply doubling down on tradition, or to begin to reintegrate nature, spirituality in some form. It is clear that many religious institutions and their adherents chose to cling to tradition, and still do. But among those that did not, I suggest there were generally three paths forward from which to choose. One path was to look both within and outside of their religious tradition for green spiritual dimensions to incorporate or rediscover. And I described how some of this has occurred in Eastern and Western traditions in my earlier sermons in this series. The second path was to walk away from traditions and explore ancient pagan spirituality for wisdom that might be relearned or reimagined from our ancient ancestors who lived more closely with the earth. A renewed interest in Wicca, Celtic paganism, indigenous wisdom, goddess worship, and earth-based spirituality of all kinds soon emerged. And many UUs were attracted to such teachings and practices, and this remains the case. It has also influenced the Unitarian Universalist faith as a whole, expanding opportunities to explore the rich spiritual traditions that have emerged in the human journey. It is now common, for example, to see the pagan solar holidays of the summer and winter solstice and the fall and spring equinox celebrated in our churches along with Christmas, Easter, and Hanukkah, and other mainstream holidays. Many of our congregations have active groups affiliated with the Covenant of Unitarian Universalist Pagans, or CUPS. Most of those who identify as pagan have a strong sense of earth spirituality, though some do not. Some believe in magic and supernaturalism, and others do not. Some see the world as re-enchanted, home to multiple spirits and pantheons of deities much like the animism of our ancient ancestors, while some choose to reimagine these entities as metaphorical, venerating, though not believing as factual, the pre-scientific creation myths and understandings of the world. There are so many varieties of paganism in contemporary spirituality that it is hard to generalize about the beliefs or practices, or even whether the term paganism is still a meaningful label. And in fairness, the term has always been problematic. The word's origins come from the Latin word paganus, which referred to country dwellers. Urban-centered Christians in the 4th century began calling their polytheistic neighbors pagans to denigrate what they saw as backward, ignorant religious beliefs. Ancient people with an earth-centric spirituality would not have understood the term, and in many cultures, they would not have understood what the term religion meant either, since their beliefs and practices were largely inseparable from the routines of daily life. The third path, which emerged mostly from humanist and scientific thinkers, has become known as religious naturalism. And this is what I will spend the remainder of this sermon exploring. It should be noted that even though the term religious naturalism has become more defined in recent decades, and there is even a religious naturalist association, there remains a broad spectrum of beliefs among those who identify as religious naturalists, ranging from the strictly scientific to the highly mystical. Many contemporary UU ministers, including yours truly, identify as religious naturalists. And you may recall me speaking about this in one of my candidating sermons last spring. And given the nature of our faith, it should be no surprise that the subset of UU ministers who embrace this label includes a variety of individual beliefs influenced by humanism, Buddhism, Taoism, ecofeminism, and many other spiritual teachings. Some of my colleagues have tried to nuance the label to clarify their unique theological perspective. For example, the late Reverend William R. Murray called himself a humanistic religious naturalist. But I find this a bit awkward and not very useful outside of theological discussions. Identifying as a UU religious naturalist is about as far as I'm willing to go. But no matter how we describe ourselves, what is common to all of us who identify as religious naturalists is the idea of nature as the fundamental spiritual gateway in our approach to religion. A leading religious naturalist philosopher, Donald A. Crosby, describes his journey to this path nicely, writing, quote, "For a time I had been attracted to religious humanism as an alternative to theism, but now I began to realize that human beings, as one spin-off of the irrepressibly creative workings of nature, should not be regarded as religiously ultimate themselves, but rather as evidencing, along with other forms of emergent life, the ultimacy of nature," end quote. As I described in my sermon last spring, religious naturalism begins with a reverence for the diversity of life and a strong sense of ecological identity, the idea that humans are an emergent part of the web of life and derivative of the earth. Religious naturalism views the cosmos through the lens of science, but interprets the cosmos not only in rational scientific terms, but through the poetry and beauty of spiritual language and metaphor. It is a religion of nature with a capital N, centered on the earth. And for those of us on the mystical end of the spectrum, the awe and wonder of nature provides a window into the sacred mystery at the heart of creation. The sacred story of religious naturalism is what the theologian Thomas Berry called the great story, the epic story of how our universe evolved over the last 13.7 billion years. And the task to which our faith calls us is what Berry called the great work, the work of transitioning the human presence on earth from being detrimental to being a sustainable presence in harmony with the wondrous diversity of life. Religious naturalism can obviously provide a powerful spiritual grounding to motivate our environmental advocacy, but it also acknowledges the intersectional nature of justice issues such as racism and poverty, and can help sustain us with the hope required to engage in the difficult work of activism. All forms of injustice are detrimental to the web of life, and thus the ethics of religious naturalism are inclusive of the human and the non-human, and are planetary in scope. To date, there is no active religious movement that is promoting a new religion called religious naturalism. But as I mentioned earlier, there is an association founded by the author and cell biologist Ursula Goodenough, and several Facebook groups and other social networks promoting the exploration of these ideas. The tent of religious naturalism is home to all sorts of people from many religious traditions. But as you might expect, among clergy groups, the UU presence is significant and probably represents the majority. If a distinct religious naturalist faith ever does emerge, it will probably arise from within Unitarian Universalism. But with the diverse and inclusive nature of our faith, I doubt a schism would ever occur. Instead, I foresee religious naturalism growing in influence among UUs in the 21st century, much like transcendentalism did in the 19th. Whenever I have preached on religious naturalism or led discussion groups, I've often heard comments like, "That's what I am. I never knew how to describe my beliefs, but now I do. I'm a religious naturalist." Our seventh principle affirms respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And though I prefer slightly stronger language, I believe it remains the most explicitly theological statement of our seven principles. It emphasizes our core values of acknowledging our interdependence and our love of life. Whether you identify as some variety of pagan or religious naturalist, or if you find some other spiritual path more important in your search for truth and meaning, there is a green spiritual thread in our faith that binds us to the earth and to all life. In times of despair, the solace of nature can be a comfort to us all. And when we open ourselves to the beauty of the earth and gaze into the sacred wonder of the cosmos, we are reaching back in time, sharing the innate spiritual feelings that once stirred the souls of our ancient ancestors. I invite you now to join in singing our closing hymn, Blue Boat Home.
Though below me I feel no motion, standing on these mountains and plains, far away from the rolling ocean,
Our closing words are a Ute prayer from the book Earth Prayers. Earth, teach me stillness as the grasses are stilled with light. Earth, teach me suffering as old stones suffer with memory. Earth, teach me humility as blossoms are humble with beginning. Earth, teach me caring as the mother who secures her young. Earth, teach me courage as the tree which stands all alone. Earth, teach me limitation as the ant which crawls on the ground. Earth, teach me freedom as the eagle which soars in the sky. Earth, teach me resignation as the leaves which die in the fall. Earth, teach me regeneration as the seed which rises in the spring. Earth, teach me to forget myself as the snow forgets its life. Earth, teach me to remember kindness as dry fields weep with rain.
Now we will extinguish our chalice with the following words. Please join me as Reverend Kevin extinguishes the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of the community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.